A great honor at the school to have Thierry de Duve with us, who will be delivering a lecture on the theme of our public program, after also visiting thoroughly, I would say, the exhibitions and also talking with some of you, the students on campus, about their projects and about the show in general. So that's been extremely generous of you, Mr. de Duve, to engage with the school, also with your speech yesterday evening, which I've also heard from many tutors, was kind of a marking point for us in terms of also what's we want to try to do at the school and to achieve, and the clarity we want to achieve in terms of what we are doing. The title of this evening's lecture is Duchamp and Authorship, so it's, as everyone, although authorship stripped bare.
Yeah, it's more Duchamp.
Okay, it's more Duchampish. That's the updated version. I guess Mr. de Duve doesn't need any extended introductions, but I will read a few things of his bio. He's a historian and philosopher of art. He is professor at Hunter College in New York, University City of New York. His English publications include Pictorial Nominalism from 1991, Kant After Duchamp from 1996, Clement Greenberg Between the Lines, 1996-2010, and Look, 100 Years of Contemporary Art, which is also a show at Beaux-Arts, and soon in the Sweet Shops of Marx, Beuys, Klein and Duchamp from 2012, and the upcoming publication at the University of Chicago Press, Aesthetics at Large, Art Ethics and Politics. I should mention one more publication which I kindly received from Mr. de Duve, which is Faire École, ou La Refaire, which is a publication from 1991, which was then updated after an experience of 2 years at St. Lucas, Ghent. So Mr. de Duve has been engaging already with our school in recent years. You probably all know that he also founded back in the 70s, I don't remember, 72 was it? L'École de Recherche Graphique here in Brussels. So not only has he been teaching, but he's also been sort of initiating art schools and an art school in art, such as Faire École ou La Refaire. Speaks very much about a program that was organized during the summer in, I don't remember which town, Bordeaux. And it was very much about a kind of out-of-school experience of teaching with very particular modules and a whole kind of transformation of the teaching-student relationship that he introduced in that experience. It was also in preparation of a school that was supposed to be made in Paris, but that never took place for political reasons, because Jacques Chirac went from being the mayor of Paris to then the president of the French Republic, and didn't probably really believe in the idea of a new art in town. I mention all that just to say that we're also in a very sufferish kind of atmosphere. It's very hot in here, and we've been trying over these past days, also here on campus, somehow suspend the dynamic of a normal art school and try to generate something more personal, something more engaging, and something which you could describe as a reviewing of schools, of an art school, not just of authorship, but also reviewing what we mean with an art school. So I will stop there, and again, thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and the floor is yours.
Nicolas, thank you very much for your invitation. It's a great pleasure to be back in Brussels, where I used to live for a very long time, and also a great pleasure to be back in St. Lucas, which is not St. Lucas anymore, but Luca, the Italian name without the saint. But indeed, I have a particular warm relationship with the St. Lucas institutions in the plural, because I started my career as a teacher at the Francophone equivalent of St. Lucas Saint-Luc, which still exists, and then which yielded, as you said, Lergue. Okay, so now I will try not to be too long. Authorship stripped bare even. This is, of course, from the poster, so I was given the cue that we would be reviewing authorship, but we would also be striking authorship in red, and perhaps even striking the review. So I would like to propose a little theory of authorship with the strike, pulled, ready-made, from the work of Marcel Duchamp, and meant to please modernist art historians and postmodern deconstructionists alike. So I have to please two very different camps. You will see. Art historians want works of art to have an identifiable author, the way cops want crimes to have an identifiable culprit. That is, someone responsible for the work or the crime. Postmodern deconstructionists suspect the very concept of author. You know, it started with Michel Foucault asking, what is an author? And then came Roland Barthes, the death of the author, and so on and so on. If I can put Foucault in the category of deconstructionists, which is not exactly true, but anyway, in a general way, postmodern deconstructionists suspect the very concept of author the way criminologists suspect the notion of responsibility. I.e., for the cop, it's important to know who did the crime. For the criminologist, it's important to demystify the responsibility of the criminal and look for psychological and most of the time social causalities that brought this person to commit a crime. This I must do, so my task tonight is to get a little theory of authorship with the bar out of the work of Marcel Duchamp, and that would please both the art historians and the criminologists, let us say, of art history. Let's start from a definition. A ready-made is a work of art without an artist to make it, if I may simplify the definition. I love this, if I may simplify the definition, which is, of course, anything but simple. So an artist, a work of art without an artist to make it, that would be a work of art without an author struck in red. So with an author, but one that is suspected, or without an author in the traditional sense of authorship, the way art historians and cops want it. So let us try to analyze that. And the first thing, if a ready-made is a work of art without an author to make it, what is to make, according to Duchamp? Let's read from an interview with Georges Charbonnier. The word art, etymologically speaking, means to make, simply to make. Now, what is making? Making something is choosing a tube of blue, a tube of red, putting some of it on the palette, and always choosing the quality of the blue, the quality of the red, and always choosing the place to put it on the canvas. It's always choosing. So, in order to choose, you can use tube of paint, but you can use brushes, but you can also use a ready-made object. Choice is the main thing, even in normal painting, which there is an innuendo that a ready-made is an abnormal painting of some kind. So, if we look at the most famous of all the ready-mades, and if we look at the justification for the protest against this urinal having been censored at the first exhibition of the Society of Independent Artists in New York in 1917, we read an editorial entitled "The Blind Man" is a little magazine in which it appeared, and the editorial is entitled "The Richard Mudd Case," and we read, "Whether Mr. Mudd, with his own hands, made the fountain or not has no importance, he chose it. He took an ordinary article of life, placed it so that its useful significance disappeared under the new title and point of view, and created a new thought for that object." So, to make equals to choose. But how do you choose? What are the criteria of choosing? What is choice, according to Duchamp? One element of answer. The notes, by the way, all come from the Green Box. The Green Box was published in 1936, and it's a facsimile edition of handwritten notes dated, most of them from the 1913 to 1919, but a few later. So here, peinture de précision et beauté d'indifférence. Painting of precision, beauty of indifference, those are definitions of choice. So let's start with precision. Another note. Préciser les ready-made. En projetant pour un moment à venir, we switch to the English. I don't like this translation, specifications, but that is. So to be precise, to specify a ready-made by planning for a moment to come, on such a day, such a date, such a minute, to inscribe a ready-made. The ready-made can later be looked for with all kinds of delays, avec tout délai. The important thing is just this matter of timing, this snapshot effect, like a speech delivered on no matter what occasion, but at such and such an hour, it is a kind of rendezvous. And then he adds, naturally inscribe that date, hour, minute on the ready-made as information. Aussi le côté exemplaire du ready-made, the serial, but also the exemplary character of the ready-made. So we will encounter several things that are important here. Right now, I would like to underline that a ready-made is a kind of rendezvous between someone who, after the fact, we will call the author, and an object. It's a rendezvous with a person and an object. The maker is not necessarily the one who has done the object with his hands. He will choose it on the occasion of a rendezvous. It happens that Duchamp did one ready-made, if we can call it a ready-made, which is precisely entitled Rendezvous. Rendezvous du 6 février 1916. And it was done, as you know, on that particular date, with a very special method. As you can see, it consists in four postcards pasted together on a sheet of paper and typed with what you might call a poem. But the method for constructing the poem, for writing the poem, was very bizarre. Here it is. Duchamp explains. There would be a verb, a subject, a complement, adverbs, and everything perfectly correct as such, as words, but meaning in these sentences was a thing I had to avoid. The verb was meant to be an abstract word acting on a subject that is a material object. In this way, the verb would make the sentence look abstract. So just try it. Try to build sentences that are grammatically correct, a verb, a subject, and so on, but that make no sense at all. It is absolutely impossible, because even nonsense has a meaning. So this method of writing, I would like to underline, is at the extreme opposite of André Breton's technique of écriture automatique, where he would advocate, on the contrary, thinking that he understood Freud very well, but he didn't, advocating that the artist or the poet would simply let the flow of consciousness, the stream of consciousness, dictate to his pen what to write. What Breton forgot what Freud did not forget, is that it takes the analyst to hear the signifier, as Lacan would say, and that not every word that comes out of this stream of consciousness is significant. You need the ear of the analyst to pick up what is significant. Well, it seems that Duchamp's method to compose rendezvous is what he himself called sur-censure, over-censorship. So you try a subject, and then you try a verb, and you verify if it makes sense. And if it makes sense, you scratch it. You have to find something else. And of course, it always makes sense. So that in the end, this technique produces a Freudian slip with almost every word, because the Freudian slip is precisely what escapes the censorship. And let us look at a detail, one sentence, and there are others that are probably just as significant, but I did not analyze the whole poem. I concentrate on the one in the middle. Après maints efforts en vue du peigne, quel dommage. After many efforts in view of the comb, what a pity. This is typed, composed on the 6th of February 1916. On the 17th of February, 11 days later, here comes the comb. He produces a ready-made with no title, so it is simply peigne, but with an inscription. More about the inscription later. The inscription says, in French, 3 ou 4 gouttes de hauteur n'ont rien à faire avec la sauvagerie. And then around the corner, Marcel Duchamp, February 17, 1916, 11 a.m. You can read it. You cannot really see it on the photograph, but it's around the corner. So this is the one and only rendezvous where Duchamp followed his own rule to inscribe the date and the hour and the minute on the ready-made. Now, if you read 3 ou 4 gouttes de hauteur with a sense for poetry and for alliteration and for punning, which Duchamp certainly had, you can read it 3 ou 4 goûts d'auteur, goût d'auteur, tasters of author instead of gouttes d'auteur, and so on. There is much more to say about this peigne, because if you speak French, you certainly know that peigne is the subjunctive of the verb peindre. Que je peigne. Oh, may I paint, if I only could paint. So in a ready-made, Duchamp has managed to hide his melancholy attachments to the craft of painting, which he had in between abandoned. And then, so when he answers Francis Roberts' question, how do you choose a ready-made? By saying, it chooses you, so to speak. You see how complex the idea of choice becomes. Just like in a Freudian slip, it is whatever Oedipus complex or whatever else you have that dictates you what to say, so the ready-made is going to choose you. It is not the artist who chooses the ready-made. That was peinture de précision. What about beauté d'indifférence, beauty of indifference, which is still there? Another quote. You have to approach something with an indifference, as if you had no aesthetic emotion. The choice of ready-mades is always based on visual indifference and at the same time on the total absence of good or bad taste. 2 minutes ago I asked you to imagine writing a poem by censoring every word that would make sense, and now I would ask you to choose an object on the table here without any preference. So I like that glass because I'm thirsty. Oh, I should not choose that because I have an attraction to it. I hate this bottle which I found very ugly. I should not choose it either because I should not choose the opposite of attraction, repulsion either. I should choose with an absence of good or bad taste. This is what Duchamp also called liberté d'indifférence. Liberté d'indifférence, liberty of indifference, is an expression that he got from his philosophy manual when he was a teenager studying going to school in Rouen or in Blainville, wherever he was. And Liberté d'indifférence came out of the book of philosophy written for children by Pierre Janet, and it was a reference to this. Libre arbitre, Anne de Buridan trouvait une formule. This is also in Duchamp's handwriting. Free will, that's libre arbitre. Buridan's ass, or Buridan's donkey, find a formula. Who or what is Buridan's ass, Buridan's donkey? Buridan was a medieval philosopher, a nominalist, who imagined the following thought experiment. Imagine a donkey presented with an equally attractive bucket of wheat to eat and a bucket of water to drink. And they are equally attractive so that the donkey is going to exert his liberté d'indifférence, his free will, by trying to choose. And the lesson that Buridan contrived out of this thought experiment is that the poor donkey starves and dies of thirst and hunger in the middle because he is completely unable to choose. So, how do you choose a ready-made? It chooses you, but you have to choose with a liberté d'indifférence. Where is the artist? Is the artist going to die in the middle of his choices? How does he illustrate this? Another note from the green box. Le jeu du tonneau est une très belle sculpture d'adresse. I underline belle, since we have beauté d'indifférence. Peinture de précision et beauté d'indifférence. So you have to exert a liberty, a freedom, and produce something beautiful. This is a sculpture of address, of a skill. Let's look at the English. The barrel game. The barrel game is the game where you have to throw coins into a sort of chest, and the central door, the central place, is called la grenouille, the frog. And so people would aim at the frog, of course. But according to Duchamp's Beauté d'indifférence, which is a sculpture of skill, you have to exert skill. And it is all the pieces in the frog's mouth should not be preferred to all the pieces out, or above all to a good average. So to exert your liberty of indifference, and to escape, let us say, the starvation that the donkey dies of, you have to be so indifferent to aiming for the center or aiming for the periphery. You should not aim at all. And then Duchamp adds, record photographically should be made of 3 successive performances. The work that he never did this, by the way, this remains a note, but he has never done a sculpture that represents the trajectories of the coins that are being thrown at the frog or the barrel. But the work that resembles the most, and of which there are 3 successive performances, is the 3 standard stoppages, where chance is going to play a role. The 3 standard stoppages obeys the following fabrication rule, l'idée de la fabrication. L'idée de la fabrication. Si un fil horizontal d'un mètre de longueur, etc. Let's read the English. If a horizontal straight thread, 1 meter long, falls from a height of 1 meter onto a horizontal plane, twisting as it pleases, and creates, the grammar is incorrect, doesn't matter, and creates a new image of the unit of length. 3 samples obtained in more or less similar conditions, considered in their relation to one another, they are an approximate reconstitution of the unit of length. Le maître étalon devient le stoppage étalon, because it is stoppage thread that, with which you mend a cloth. So here you can see at the bottom the three threads that have fallen on a piece of canvas. It's actually dark blue, it has turned black with age, and the piece of canvas has been pasted onto a piece of glass, and according to those lines, three rulers, three schablonen were fabricated to follow those lines and to draw with a new standard meter that is not the regular standard meter. And so that the system of rules that prevails in this piece, Duchamp called le régime de la pesanteur, ministère des coïncidences, and so on in English, regime of gravity, ministry of coincidence, department, and then he interrupts himself. Or better, regime of coincidence, ministry of gravity. So gravity is going to decide, not the artist, what the shape of the standard meter will be, and chance will decide with a repetition, do it 3 times. In the end, he concludes, les 3 stoppages étalons égale du hasard en conserve, canned chance. So, let us recapitulate a little bit. What is choice according to Duchamp? 1, painting of precision and beauty of indifference. 2, free will equals Buridan's as, find a formula. 3, how do you choose a ready-made? It chooses you, so to speak. And 4, I add, I object to responsibility. Remember that the cops are looking for the responsible, for the guy who's responsible of the crime, and art historians are looking for the person who's responsible for the work, and criminologists and deconstructionists suspect the very notion of responsibility. What is it with Duchamp? Here is the full quote. I'm not responsible. It was made, sous-entendu, the ready-made. It was ready-made. I wasn't the one who made it. There is a defense. I object to responsibility. What I find interesting here, and more complex than simply being the responsible author that the cops are looking for, or criticizing and deconstructing the notion of responsibility like the criminologists are doing, it is objecting to responsibility. It is not fleeing responsibility, it is objecting, countering, being against responsibility. What that means, well, let us leave it at that. I am not going to explain more than Duchamp can explain himself. I am laying out the complexity of whatever philosophy of authorship you could get out of the work of Duchamp. Number 1 was to make. Number 2 is going to be to name. So you replace the making of the object, since it is a ready-made, with the choice, and then the naming of the object. In 1914, he explains to Pierre Cabane, I did the bottle rack. I just bought it at the Bazaar de l'Hôtel de Ville. The idea of an inscription came as I was doing it. The object in question disappeared. Yes, let us comment, sorry. The idea of an inscription came as I was doing it. Remember that in the note préciser les ready-made, it is en projetant pour un moment à venir d'inscrire un ready-made. And inscrire is underlined twice, to inscribe a ready-made. We have already seen the comb that was inscribed. Now we are going to apply this to the first object with an inscription, which is the bottle rack. Now the bottle rack of 1914 disappeared, and Duchamp apparently wrote a sentence inside the lower circle, metal circle of the bottle rack. But you know that Duchamp chose this by going to the Bazar de l'Hôtel de Ville, le BHV. It's still there in Paris, Rue de Rivoli, and I myself bought several of these bottle racks, and I gave them to my friends, and I had one in my living room for quite a while. This particular model, which they still bought, they still sold at the Bazar de l'Hôtel de Ville in the 90s. Now it's too late because they replaced it with a very ugly plastic model that's awful. But this was pretty nice. So this is a Bazar de l'Hôtel de Ville. You can see the label here from the shop. But the one in 1914 disappeared. Duchamp flees the First World War in 1915, embarks on a ship to New York, and starts doing ready-made, as you will see a little later, in New York. And then in 1916, he writes to his sister Suzanne, his favorite sister, and he says, Suzanne, please go to Rue de la Condamine, where I had my apartment, and try to find a few things that I left there. One of them was a bicycle wheel, you know that one, and also a bottle rack. And Suzanne writes back and says, oh, sorry, Marcel, but we thought this was junk. We threw them away. So that bottle rack has disappeared, and then Duchamp writes a second letter to Suzanne where he asks her to go to the Bazar de l'Hôtel de Ville to buy one, and to invent a sentence. He lets his sister invent whatever sentence she wants to inscribe in the bottle ring. But that bottle rack has also disappeared. When it reappears, as you can see, it is a different model. In the Exposition Surréaliste d'Objets, which was organized by André Breton in Paris in 1936, and where it is in the company of so-called primitive art, African masks, works by other surrealist artists, abstract geometrical and scientific models, and also the little cage, which is also another Duchamp work called Why Not Sneeze. So this model reappears here. What happens to it, I don't know. It gets photographed by Man Ray. The photograph gets into the Boîte en Valise in the 40s, and this object eventually also disappears. So that if it had an inscription on the bottom ring, we don't know what it was. The next time a bottle rack reappears is in a show in New York, I don't know who curated it, called Art and the Found Object. And it was a found object, not signed by Duchamp, probably found or chosen by the curator, knowing that Duchamp had done this. But in any case, one of the other artists in that show was Robert Rauschenberg. And when he saw that object, he bought it for $3. For $3. And then he went to Duchamp and he asked Duchamp to sign it and to inscribe it. And Duchamp indeed inscribes it on the bottom ring. And what he inscribes, if you can read, I don't know if it's readable there, impossible de me rappeler la phrase originale. Marcel Duchamp, 1960. So the original sentence is lost, but we have a record of the memory loss of the artist himself. This is 1960. There are many copies or many replicas of this bloody bottle rack. The next one reappears in 1961. You can see that it is the model from the Bazar de l'Hôtel de Ville, the same that I bought several times. So I guess that this was bought in the early 60s at the BHV, and it is this time inscribed with no sentence, simply signed Marcel Duchamp, 1914, réplique, 1961. I don't know what happened to that model either. And then finally, in 1964, he is approached by Arturo Schwartz, who is a Milan art dealer, who convinces Duchamp to produce an edition of some 14 ready-mades in an edition of 8 plus 2 exhibition copies. And so it's very interesting that this one is signed on the outside of the ring. It no longer bears the original date of 1914. It doesn't even mention that it is a replica. It is dated 1964, and this particular exemplar is the 7th out of 8. So, to inscribe a ready-made, it started with the bottle rack, the idea of an object with an inscription. In the interview, Duchamp goes on. It was in 1915, especially in the United States, that I did other objects with inscriptions, like the snow shovel, on which I wrote something in English. And he adds, the word ready-made thrust itself on me then. In the original French of the interview, le mot ready-made s'est imposé à moi. C'est imposé à moi. So, how do you choose a ready-made? It chooses you, so to speak. But even the word ready-made chose the artist. It is not the artist who chose the word. And so, in 1914, starting with the snow shovel, he inscribed it. This time the sentence has not been lost. This is, by the way, the Schwartz replica, not the original. And it is inscribed on the back of the handle. You cannot see here. You can see the signature, but on the back, the sentence, in advance of the broken arm, in English, is written. So, let us now, if the word ready-made thrust itself upon the artist, it still remains a generic name, a name valid for all the ready-mades. What about the names of individual ready-mades? Let us try to distinguish now the name from the inscription. It's not exactly the same thing, although with some ready-mades it tends to become the same thing. But for example, in the snow shovel, the title, the name, is in advance of the broken arm, but in the case of the comb, the title is Peigne, and the inscription is 2 ou 3 gouttes de hauteur, etc. So, this now forces us to become linguists for a little while, primitive linguists perhaps. Here, porte-chapeau, which is a simple hat rack, is named by its common noun. It's a tautology, if you want, 1916. Fountain, 1917, is a metaphor, because of course it only becomes a fountain. The real fountain is the person who uses the urinal, of course. It becomes a fountain if you put it in this position and then you pee on yourself if you realize, if you're a man and use this urinal in the position that it is. It is like l'arroseur arrosé of early cinema. The bicycle wheel is a metonym or a synecdoche, i.e. the part for the whole. The whole is not just a bicycle wheel, it's a bicycle wheel plus a stool that acts as a basis for the sculpture. So, but it is called simply by a part of the object. This is a beautiful one. It's an alliteration, trébuchet. Now this is a very interesting story. There's a little anecdote behind this object. Duchamp lives in New York by then, 1916-17. He needs to hang his clothes. He goes to buy a clothes hanger, and then he's too lazy to hang it on the wall. And the clothes hanger stays on the floor, and Duchamp keeps tripping over it. In French, trébucher, to stumble over an object. And so finally he decides to take a revenge against the object. He says, oh, I keep stumbling on you. You want to stay there? Okay, you stay there. And he nails the thing to the floor. And he calls it trébuchet, which is a word with several meanings. One of them is a trap for a bird, another one is a scale to weigh gold, and a third meaning is a tactic in the chess game. Of course, Duchamp is a chess champion, to offer a pawn to your adversary so that he stumbles on it. But the interesting thing with this trébucher is the tr, and reminds me of the jeune homme triste dans un train, of which Duchamp explained to Pierre Cabane that it doesn't matter so much that the young man is sad. What matters is tr. Tr est très important. And so, jeune homme triste, you can see that if you play on words, this is me, this is not Duchamp. Jeune homme, I name tr in tr. This is my interpretation of jeune homme written differently, which becomes I name tr in tr. This is also an interesting object, which starts as a description, and there's also an anecdote to it. À bruit secret. The official translation is with hidden noise, but it should be with secret noise, actually. So, what is it? It's a ball of twine imprisoned in between two metal plates with 4 screws, and he gave it to his friend Walter Arnsberg, the collector, and Arnsberg, who had a sense of humor himself, unscrewed the 4 screws and put something inside the empty core of the ball of twine, and then screwed it back on, so that when you agitate the thing, it rattles and it produces a secret noise. And Duchamp never opened it, so he himself did not know what his friend had put in there. So, à bruit secret, you might say, is a very simple description of this anecdote, but it also has an inscription. So you see that inscription is not necessarily the same thing as description or as name. And here you can read these sentences. They are bilingual. Some words are in English, some words are in French, and some letters are missing. So the first word, for example, could be pig or peg in English. Decides, débarrasse, and there's an accent, so it's definitely French. Débarrasser ou débarrasser. It could be an E or an S at the end. Les déserts fournissent, as however corresponds, etc. So you can fill in the gaps yourself, and the sentence goes on onto the bottom plate of the object, and I'm not going to decode. It becomes, you see that there are some words, carré is in French, sharp bargain, for example, is in it. So, à bruit secret, description, inscription, the inscription plays on bilingualism, and so on. An anagram, anemic cinema, you know what an anagram is. You take the letters of a word and you mingle, you change the order, and you get this another word. So, anemic is an anagram of cinema, and vice versa. And you can see here, this is a movie, not a ready-made, but it's made from the roto-reliefs, and you can see on top the title, Anemic Cinema. Here, the anagram will reappear. Not only is in advance of the broken arm probably some kind of allegory perhaps of the usage of the snow shovel to shove snow with it, and then you might break your arm doing this heavy work, but it also contains an intertextual appeal to another ready-made, which is an anagram of this one. This one is called Pelle à neige in French. And if you play on an anagram with Pelle à neige, you get Elle a peine. She has a comb. And of course, that reminds me of the comb. So see, there are connections between one ready-made and the other. But what I'm commenting here is simply the necessity for an object which is not made by the artist, but simply chosen by the artist, or it has chosen the artist, this necessity of also bearing a name. And of course, Duchamp was a master at punning. All word plays you can imagine. So anagrams, this is an anagram, a pun, of course, in French, and a dirty joke also. Elle a chaud au cul. J'ai pas besoin de traduire, non? Même pour les néerlandophones. Elle a chaud au cul. Does everyone get it? Yes. And then he comments on it in English and makes another pun, a very risque Joconda, 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 Joconda. The alliteration he adds to the pun. And there is more. Here is a bilingual pun, pulled at 4 pins, is simply the English translation of the French expression tirer à 4 épingles. Tirer à 4 épingles means to be very well dressed. The English expression is dressed to the nines, but he literally translates it, and he makes it a drawing and a lithograph. You can see that a piece of cloth has been pulled by 4 pins, and it is supposed to illustrate a book of poems by Pierre de Massot. And finally, this is the last straw, a bilingual spoonery, le verrou de sûreté à la cuillère. You know what spoonerism is? It's in French un calembour, un contrepé, une contrepétrie, is when you take one syllable and you put, and usually they're always dirty, you know. Les mutins passèrent la berge du ravin. Les mutins, sorry, I know not in other languages. Les mutins passèrent la berge du ravin becomes, sorry mesdames, les putains passèrent la verge du rabbin. So you play with syllables and you move them. That's called the spoonerism in English. But look, it has a spoon in it. So the play on words become literal in the sculpture. And it is accompanied by an aphorism by Duchamp, du dos de la cuillère au cul de la douairière, which is of course another spoonerism with a rather kinky one, from the back of the spoon to the dowager's ass. Good. All these plays on words, Duchamp maybe commented by assembling them under une sorte de nominalisme pictural, a kind of pictorial nominalism. And then he adds contrôler, check. And this note from the green box is actually dated on the other side, 1913, if I remember well. So it seems that words, inscriptions, titles, names are just as active in the production of a ready-made as choice. And finally, let's go back to our very simple definition. A ready-made is a work of art without an artist or without an author to make it, if I may simplify the definition. And let us actually find a third condition which is absolutely necessary to the production of a ready-made, and that is to sign. You can see how Duchamp satisfies the traditional art historian for whom an authentic work of art is a work of art that is signed. He is not subverting that. He will, as we already know, and you will see it again, he will object to that responsibility, but he will also gracefully give the signature. Many of the ready-mades that we have seen were signed in the most traditional way, but not everyone is traditionally signed. Here is a photo of Duchamp in his first retrospective. Look at the date, 1963. The man is 76 years old. And only at 76. You think he's world famous, but not in 1963. Not yet, not yet. By the end of this is an aside, but if you ask somebody in the art world, not the man on the street, but somebody who's already well informed, in 1959, who is the best known artist in the world, you will get Picasso for an answer. If you come back 10 years later, you will get Duchamp for an answer. 1969, that's when Duchamp's fame explodes. But he is 76-year-old before he has a first retrospective. And as you can see, he enjoys it tremendously, smoking his cigar in the show. And look at that naked woman in the background. What is she doing there? There's another photo that shows Duchamp playing chess with the woman in question, whose name is Eve Babbitt, and she's still alive and well, and an active member of the Los Angeles art world. She's, of course, an artist herself. So, and I don't know how good she was at chess. All we know is the photo was being taken here in the show. So he's got his first retrospective in 1963. This is the first time, it's not the first time that some ready-mades have been shown, but it would be too complicated to go into the detail of which ready-made was seen first and so on. We already noticed one instance, which is the bottle rack in the vitrine of the Exposition Surréaliste d'Objets in 1936. But I can guarantee you that public presentations of ready-made were extremely rare. And this is the first time you saw it in this photo. The urinal is there. This is another ready-made, you know, the typewriter cover with the word Underwood printed on it that hangs above it. And at the opening of his retrospective, of course, Duchamp is there. He made the trip to California. And there are a few local celebrities, and one who's not local at all, Andy Warhol, made sure that his second show at the Ferrers Gallery in 1963, when he showed the Campbell soup, when he showed the Elvis paintings, was planned a few days after the opening, so he could make sure that he was there and meet Duchamp. So here you have Andy Warhol, Billy Al Benston, who's an LA artist, and Dennis Hopper, the movie actor, you know, enjoying themselves, dressed in tuxedos, at the opening of Duchamp's show. And there's another story. I like these little stories. Hopper accompanies Duchamp back to his hotel. And by the way, Duchamp stayed at the Green Hotel, the Hotel Green. And he liked it because of the green box that he had made. So the color green had special significance for him. And so they arrive at the hotel, and Duchamp probably evokes the green box to Dennis Hopper, who accompanies him. And Dennis Hopper, being then still a very young man, he says, "You want it?" He climbs on the wall, he takes the sign from the hotel, he takes it away, he steals it, and he gives it to Duchamp. This is it. Bad photo, but this is it. And Duchamp signs it and gives it back to Dennis Hopper. Isn't it a beautiful story? Not only that, I'm sorry that I don't have a good photo here, but I can guarantee you, because I took those photos, I just lost the originals. But I photographed, the signature is on the finger of the pointing hand. There, Marcel Duchamp signed. And he gave it to Dennis Hopper, and I myself went to photograph it in Dennis Hopper's house many years later. Unfortunately, I've lost the original negative. And so, what is my point here? Duchamp signs a sign, a hotel sign, and he gives it a title. And what is the title? Signed sign. Le signe signé. Signed sign. The whole story comes full circle here. The signed sign and it is Duchamp's very last ready-made. So I want to conclude that, I'm not yet at the conclusion, excuse me. So the object needs to bear a signature. If it has no signature, then it is not an authentic ready-made. But what is the signature? Oh, sorry, I'm getting tired. I forgot this. This is also interesting because it is a signed sign. And you know, in English, un peintre d'enseigne. I don't know how to say that in Flemish, but un peintre d'enseigne would be a sign painter. Somebody who paints advertising signs. And this hand here, the one in color, is from Duchamp's very last painting, not the last ready-made, the last painting that he did with his own hand, except for the detail in the middle, that little hand there, which he had a sign painter paint for him, a professional sign painter. That same hand is quasi the same. It's unbelievable, because most hands look like this. It's very rare to have it like this. So yeah, so it's very strange. But I noticed, and I'm sure that Duchamp had good memory when he saw the sign. He decided that there was a connection there. So Duve was the last painting signed by him, named by him, but also painted, i.e. made by him. Let us now go back to ready-mades, and where does the public life of ready-mades start? Ah, yes, reviewing authorship. I'm reaching to the end, and I'm going to review authorship with the famous red bar. And the public life of ready-mades starts with the Richard Mudd case. We already have noticed that the Blind Man's editorial mentions that Mr. Mudd chose the fountain, but we have not mentioned yet that it is signed Richard Mudd. Oh, sorry. Signed Richard Mudd, it's very visible on the photograph there also. And that Richard Mudd, nobody knew who Richard Mudd was. This is something many people know that Duchamp, today everybody knows, I mean in this company certainly, everybody knows that Richard Mudd was Duchamp. But in 1917, nobody knew it, except his one accomplice, Walter Arnsberg, and perhaps Henri-Pierre Rocher and Beatrice Wood, who were also his accomplices in the fabrication and the edition and the distribution of this little art magazine called The Blind Man. But if you look at the responsibility of this object, which is what the cops are looking for, what the art historians are looking for, you find three authorships, you find three captions. You find on the photo, fountain by Arnott. And by the way, it's only on the next page that you realize that R stands for Richard. If it hadn't been for this text, it could have been Roger, it could have been Robert, it could have been René, who knows? But it is Richard. So, it's fountain by Arnott, photographed by Alfred Stieglitz, and Alfred Stieglitz is indeed the author of the photograph. There's a little story here that I think I have 5 more minutes, that I think is worth telling. Stieglitz had a gallery. Stieglitz was not only a famous photographer, he was also an art dealer, and he had shown in his gallery 291, the address was 291 Fifth Avenue, New York. He had shown Rodin's watercolors, Matisse, other famous European artists, maybe Cézanne also, I think Cézanne watercolors also. And he had a stable of avant-garde American artists, Arthur Dove, Marsden Hartley, John Merritt, and especially his wife, or future wife at the time, Georgia O'Keeffe. So he's a famous gallerist as well as a famous photographer. He was not friendly with Duchamp. He thought Duchamp was a charlatan. He changed his mind later, but at the time they were not in the same circles. The Arnsberg circle and the Stieglitz circles were two different circles in the small New York art world. But he heard that, and he participated in the show. The show was the first exhibition of the Society of Independent Artists, which is, of course, a society of self-proclaimed artists, you might say, and who wanted to to free themselves from the rules of the Academy of Design at the time, and so they created an artist society. And their first show is going to be in April 1917. Duchamp was called as a consultant on the creation of the society, and in order to thank him, they named him chairman of the hanging committee. There was no jury, because it's a society of independent artists whose motto was no jury, no prizes, but there was a hanging committee, and Duchamp was the president of the hanging committee. Isn't that funny? And then he sends in this urinal under the pseudonym Armat, and of course it creates a scandal among the organizers of this salon. You imagine them, they are going to make fool of themselves if they accept this. But their own rules forbid them to refuse a work. So there's a whole discussion, and there are several versions. I can tell you that in the question period if you want more details. But the urinal was eliminated without a word. Duchamp, knowing that, graciously abstained from going to the meeting where the other founders of the society discussed the affair, and the journalists knew nothing. A little noise of a scandal leaked out, and one journalist says, it's been reported that somebody named Mutt, and they get the first name wrong, showed a bathroom fixture or a piece of bathroom furniture, but never indicating what piece of bathroom furniture it actually was. So there was no scandal during the exhibition, and the number 2 of The Blind Man that you see here is published right after the exhibition. That is the day the exhibition closes. That is when Duchamp chooses to disclose the repressed scandal, the act of censorship of the independents. And that, of course, leads me to the third caption. Fountain by Armat, photo by Stiglitz, the exhibit reused by the independents. So to finish my Stiglitz story, Stiglitz, who was not a friend of Duchamp, but who was very supportive of the independent artists, and he himself had 2 photographs in the show, accepts to photograph this thing, even though he thinks it's not art, of course. And that is why it's so aestheticized, you know, these beautiful curves, the lighting, there's a Marsden Hartley painting in the back. He aestheticizes the objects as much as he can, because he cannot swallow the idea of a ready-made object being art. But he wanted to protest against the act of censorship. The independents had betrayed their principles, and therefore he would accept to photograph the object. So you see how authorship and even the act of signature becomes complicated. The signature, by the way, Armat, it's not so much that it objects to responsibility, even though, because it is not by way of objecting this time to responsibility that Duchamp gracefully refrains from coming into the open with his own name. On the contrary, it is so as to avoid a public scandal. But of course, the photo is taken in order to put it in art history and books of the future. And he succeeded, and I'm one of those who fell into his trap, as you can realize. So what is this name Armat actually referring to? There are many theories, but the best one, here, the signature, as you can see, very visible on the object itself. And it refers to the actual maker, because the maker of the urinal is the J.L. Mott Iron Works. This is the name of the company that manufactures this urinal, and here is a drawing from the catalogue of that company in 1914, so 3 years before the urinal. And as you can see, it's very modern. It's one of the first showrooms of that kind, when you have all these objects displayed. Of course, the catalogue did not show men's urinals in the catalogue in the public space, but they sold them, and that is where Duchamp bought it. So Mott, there's not even one letter, you know, it's like an egg. You take the top off and you change an O into a U, and that does the trick. Is that the end of the story? Not exactly. Duchamp writes to his sister Suzanne again, on April 11, one of my female friends under a masculine pseudonym, Richard Mudd, sent in a porcelain urinal as a sculpture. So while the New Yorkers were kept in the dark, he does send a letter, but given the fact that it's in the war and it's a transatlantic letter, she probably didn't get it before the month of May when the show was over, and only to his sister does he name the object a porcelain urinal as a sculpture. But he hides his own identity. He objects to that responsibility again. He shares the responsibility with the Mott Company, shares the news with his sister, but still hides behind a female alter ego. Which brings me, of course, to his own female alter ego, Rose Sélavy, who appears in 1920. And here you can see a very beautiful photograph of Duchamp in drags, Duchamp dressed as a woman, a portrait of Rose Sélavy, 1924-25. The hands are not Duchamp's hands, they are too small to be men's hands. They are provided from the back by Germaine Ebeling, who was at the time Picabdia's girlfriend. So Rose Sélavy, as I said, appears in 1920. And the first work that she produces is a ready-made French window called Fresh Widow. So you take the N from both words. Another pun, I saved it to the end, I could have placed it elsewhere. This is coming from a carpenter's shop who produces different models of windows. And since we're in America, it was definitely advertised as a French window because Americans don't have windows that open like that. They have guillotine windows. And the French window becomes a fresh window. And the signature is typed or block letters. It's not handwritten because it is not a unique piece. It is copyright. So Rose Sélavy has the copyright on this French window. And indeed, what you see on the screen is not the original one, it is one of the Schwartz replicas from 1964. There is a whole list of Duchamp's aliases or pseudonyms or nom de plume. Richard Mudd we have seen, Rose Sélavy, which is also sometimes written with two R's. Marcel Douzamy, according to Jacques Caumont, who is one of Duchamp's biographers, this Marcel Douzamy really existed. I cannot believe it, it's too nice. But someone attributed that identity to Duchamp. And then others, Marc Sélavy, Sénat, Victor and Totor were the nicknames that his accomplice and friend Henri-Pierre Rocher. Henri-Pierre Rocher was a novelist, French novelist who was also in New York during the war. He is the author of a novel called Jules et Jean, of which François Truffaut made the famous film. He also wrote a book called Victor, which is the story of his friendship with Marcel Duchamp. And Victor, and sometimes the diminutive Totor, was the nickname he gave to Duchamp. Marchand du Sel, Marcel Duchamp, Marchand du Sel, another spoonerism, was the name Robert Desnos, the surrealist poet, gave to Duchamp. And Pierre Delair is a character in a novel signed Henry Waste, and Henry Waste is itself a nom de plume for Etty or Henrietta Settheimer, one of the three Settheimer girls, the three Settheimer sisters, who were rich ladies from New York, but who were all three artists of sorts. Etty was a writer, Florine Stettheimer was a very charming painter whom Duchamp supported. So there were socialites that were very much in Duchamp's circle at the time. So Etty or Henrietta Stettheimer puts a character called Pierre Delaire, who is actually modeled after Duchamp in one of her novels. And so to conclude, we said at the beginning that art historians want works of art to have an identifiable author, the way cops want crimes to have an identified culprit, i.e. someone responsible, whereas postmodern deconstructionists suspect the very concept of author, the way criminologists suspect the notion of responsibility. And I said that I was going to try to get out of the work of Duchamp a little humoristic theory of authorship that would satisfy both camps. Let us conclude with giving Duchamp the last word, of course. Here is a poster, you can read it, wanted $2,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of George W. Welch, alias Bull, alias Pickets, etc., etc. Operated bucket shop. A bucket shop is a crooked business, no? In New York under the name Hook, Line and Sinker. For those who speak English well, to swallow the line hook, line and sinker means to be a very naive person. Hook, line and sinker, height about ta-ta-tam, ta-ta-tam, weight and so on, known also under the name Horse 11. This is the kind of joke that you can go in New York on 42nd Street and still today you can have your mug shots being taken and you come back home with a police poster saying that you are being wanted. So the crime, the cops, the author is being wanted. He is hiding under a series of aliases and he is always also known as Horse 11. Mind you, this poster comes back. And it comes back at the Pasadena retrospective. Now that Duchamp is at the end of his career, the first really retrospective where his work is being recognized, it becomes a poster within a poster. This is the title of the work, and it is also the poster, the printed poster for the exhibition. So you have a poster inside a poster. And you can read at the Pasadena Museum, in Duchamp's personal, very bad, actually, handwriting, and signed again, this time with his hand, so the detective can find the proof of the real signature by or of Marcel Duchamp or Horse 11. Thank you.